So yeah, so we're all, so it's back, so, but my wife's.
They are so deep. There are guys that I've never even heard their name before.
They came out like a band. They were amazing.
The only reason
You ready, Libby?
for my job, so there wasn't anyone really there.
Mercedes yellow.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good evening. This point, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee on Wednesday, November 29th, 2023 at 6:35 p.m. Because this is a quintuple board meeting, I'm going to ask each board to go around and call your meetings to order. I don't know, you want to just, we want to go start that way in the Wenham FinCom and move around?
Yeah, I call to order the meeting of Wenham FinCom at 6:35, joint with Wenham, Hamilton School Committees, Select Boards, and FinComs. Present are Jeff Calder,
David Harnish.
Dan Ojikonovich. Rod Schoenberger. Finn Sprague.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call the Wenham Select Board meeting to order at 6:36 p.m. with all 5 members in present: Ben Timon, Deirdre Parati, Gary Cheeseman, Peter Clay, and Diane Bucco.
Thank you. Hamilton.
Yeah, this is John McGrath from FinCom. We do not have a quorum. We have RSV and COVID raging on the FinCom. We're going to assist with John and Coolidge and I are here tonight.
I'm sorry to hear that and glad to have you here listening.
No, we didn't, because it was supposed to be short.
Okay. Bill, it looks like you don't have a microphone. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a few people without.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just, when you're speaking, it's just good to, just, you know, so that it can get on the recording and so everyone can hear. Okay.
Just to make sure everybody, if you're speaking, pull a microphone close to you. You really can't pick it up if you're not near a microphone. So we're kind of going with the flow here with microphones.
And it really is it's twofold. One, it's so that it can get recorded on the HW cam. And also, there's a vent right here, and so it's very hard to hear right here. That being said, I should just say that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on HW cam. And do we need to do anything else? Okay. I think Vinny is returned with some, are you passing those out or are you not yet? Okay, so.
I can pass them up for you.
Okay.
That's the future.
Okay. So the agenda this evening is, the hope is that we're going to have a good opportunity for each, both towns and the school district to provide some budget highlights, and so that we can have as much transparency on this process as possible, and an opportunity for us to hear each other and ask some questions if needed. So at this point, I'd like to start off and ask the town of Hamilton to, I'm not actually sure who's going to speak to it, but to some budget highlights for us.
Good evening, thank you. Joe Domilovitz, Town Manager Hamilton. With me is Wendy Markowitz, the Finance Director. Go over really quickly a short presentation. Vinny, you have my PowerPoint?
Yeah, you want me to throw it up there?
Yeah, please.
1 second.
Just for people who might be watching at home or on video later on.
Send it to me.
Obviously, we're in the early stages of budget preparation. We've conducted the initial budget requests and reviewed budget requests with Finance and Advisory Committee, and we've done our initial projections
Just
for
in my
revenue
eyesight.
for the coming year. At this stage, the budget remains a work in progress, and we expect changes in the coming weeks. The goals for this year include a level service budget to deliver all of the same services to Hamilton residents as in prior years without an override. Projected revenues for FY25 are $40,622,453, and as currently constructed, our FY25 budget expenses are $42,896,044. So we're currently looking at a slightly more than $2 million shortfall, which we have to get to work on. Vinny, I'm on the third slide if you want to get to that. This slide here really just depicts the general budget categories. We have general government, public safety, Department of Public Works, Health and Human Services, Culture and Recreation, schools unclassified. The people who look at this presentation on the web later on will see where our initial budget expense line up. The overall change from last year is about 7.92%. A driving factor in this is that we're currently holding a great deal of funds to the side for all five unions are in contract negotiation. So prior to getting to April, we'll have a better idea of what that's going to be, but we're carrying a larger number there. We also currently carrying a level service on capital for this year, which last year was over $2 million. So that is likely to change as well. So we have a couple places that we can look to trim. One of the big drivers in the increases this year is the recent inflation that the nation's experienced, and assessments from our insurance carriers that to expect a 10% increase over last year. I'll let Wendy talk about the next two slides.
Okay, thank you. So the pie chart seems to speak volumes to everybody so that they can see how much of the budget is going to which section. So you can see the largest section is for the schools, and of the $25.4 million, 24.9 is for the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District, and $400,000 is for the Essex Tech. The other piece, which is unclassified, about nearly $6.8 million, that's made up of multiple categories: salary reserve, health insurance, debt service, capital spending, retirement, OPEB, and liability insurance. The red portion, about $4.1 million, is public safety, and then you have your general government at $2.6 million, DPW at $2.4 million, and health and human services just under $400,000, and culture and recreation at $1.2 million. So the next slide, the schools are holding about 59.25% of the budget, and the unclassified about nearly 16% of the budget, and then you can see how the public safety is about 10%, and general government and DPW is close around 6%, and culture recreation's nearly 3%, and less than 1% for health and human services.
So, as regards to the pie chart that you just saw, I'd just say that, we're really happy to see that, a little bit more normalization. The school department budget at 59.25% is probably the lowest percent of our budget that we've seen in a number of years. But as I make cuts, that'll creep up again. So we just, as we trim the budget on the town side, your share will take over again. But as of right now, you're under 60% of our budget for the first time since I've been here, which is, I appreciate how hard Eric and the staff have worked to deliver a modest budget increase for this year. Some of the FY25 expenses, assumptions, and concerns. As I noted at the top, we're currently running about $2 million in the red. We're carrying 10% increase for insurance costs. This assumes a level spend on capital projects and a large salary reserve for all town employees. This does not assume an override. It assumes no new investment in health or council on aging, the two smallest departments in our towns that touch a lot of people. It assumes a loss of revenue for the regional HR, We currently share the HR department with 2 other towns. One of the towns has notified us that they are leaving the mutual agreement and hiring their own full-time director. So we will be carrying all the costs for the HR between us and one other town. And it includes a placeholder for a new position that was identified by the select board in our planning for the year, a half-time position that will handle grants and outward communication, external communication to the community, if it makes it through the budget process. But that's in there as of right now.
Thank you. Okay. So do we have thoughts? Do we want to do questions as we go? Okay, seeing not a lot of feedback on that.
We have some questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Just one question. What is the town that you're in a regional HR arrangement with?
We currently share HR with the towns of Manchester and Rockport. Rockport is going to be hiring an assistant town manager for human resources. So they'll be exiting after the current year.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess we'll take other questions. It doesn't mean that people can't have more questions after everyone's presented.
Yeah, I have one question. How much is a salary reserve that you're holding back?
You really want me to put my cards on the table before ending the union negotiations? I'll politely ask you to dig through our budget and find it.
And I wanted to ask, you have 5 that you're, 5, that, right, and you're currently in negotiations?
We had a kickoff meeting with the union representatives yesterday, actually, and we'll be beginning negotiations in earnest at the beginning of January.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone else with questions? Okay. Looks like we're to you, Wenham.
You want to throw it up there?
Yep.
Eric?
Steve, can I ask you to talk right into the mic? 'Cause
Yep, you can.
thank you.
You can go to the first slide. All right, so this year's, the budget directive this year in Wenham was to provide a level funded budget with allowances for increases for contractual obligations only. We were lucky that we were able to settle all 4 of our unions last year, and did well in that the fact we were able to keep the cost escalations within the constraints of Proposition 2.5. These first 2 slides that I'm going to go over are our revenue projections, with a little bit of background, mostly for the benefit of the school committee. I know probably finance committees and select boards have heard this ad nauseum over the last number of years. But just to give you guys, if you're not aware, some perspective on the constraints of 2.5 and what our local receipts and state aid have done over the last 10 years or so. So the first slide, you're looking at Proposition 2.5. So we're projecting about a 3 to 3.5% increase year over year moving into our budget 25. Proposition 2.5 allows 2.5% increase from our prior year levy limit, which is the most you can raise through property taxes in the year, and plus any new construction. So to account for the expanding tax base, generally we'll see approximately 3 to 3.5%. And then just make note that in 2019, 20, and 21, there were overrides that were passed in Wenham. So that is not included in the 3 and 3.5%. This revenue source represents 90% of all our revenue, so pretty much all of it. Go to the next slide. Then again, similarly, we're based on the erratic behavior through COVID and coming out of the post-pandemic of our other revenue sources, primarily our local receipts, which is displayed there in orange. You can see that annualized growth over the last 10 years is only about 1.5%, and we do have down years. So on the conservative side, we are projecting flat over from 24. And our state aid, which on our side is called unrestricted general government aid. So this is money that comes directly from the state for unrestricted uses to the municipalities, and that annualized growth is about 2.5%. Although generally we hold that flat year over year. And something to note here is you're seeing these numbers; these are not adjusted for inflation. So essentially, if you look at as a percentage of operating expenditures, these revenue sources are actually decreasing as a percentage of total operating expenditures. So in effect, they've been going down. And then the next slide. So this is just moving into, excuse me, the general funds expenditures by function. You guys see this, I think, or a variation of it every year, really just to highlight, the different pockets of expenditures that we have on the varied uses. Next slide. And here's our proposed FY25 budget. We're a little bit further along in the process. We started early this year, so the numbers that you're looking at here are, I hesitate to say final, but they're pretty far along. And so again, like what I mentioned earlier, that level funded contractual obligations only. The select board has proposed inclusions for the FinCom's review of a 0.5 FTE in planning to help the handoff of the master plan directives that's going to be wrapping up this spring. Our server is currently almost 10 years old and failing, so we really have to replace that. And as part of replacing the server, we've migrated to O365 with the multi-factor authentication. So there's increases in licensing costs there as well. And next year is 3 elections, so state, local, and federal, and a likelihood for 2 town meetings, which is unusual for Wenham. So we had increased costs, required costs from the state, and costs for staffing in the clerk's office to account for that. And overall increase, we're looking at 3.9%. And what the numbers that we don't know yet, and we're running on assumptions, are as follows. We're using a 10% increase on our general health insurance. That's Maya. We go through Maya, and they told us to assume 10, 10, 10 over the next 3 years. They told us 8% last year, and we thought, they were coming in high, but it ended up being about 7.8. So we're believing them this year and holding it at 10 until we know differently. 8% increase on our liability insurance, which is about standard with what we've seen over the last few years, given some of the developments in town. Our assumption right now is 3% overall for education. That includes the regional school district and Essex Tech. 10.3% in our Essex County Regional Retirement Assessment. And I went with reasonable assumptions, like 3% on shared service costs for the few services that we share with the town of Hamilton. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you. Vinny? Yeah, Vinny?
Does the education amount there include our initial budget amount, or was that just kind of assumption?
No, I was really hoping you can get to that 3%, so I stuck with my original 3 and didn't bring it up to the 3.4 or 3.7. It would have blown up the whole thing, so fingers crossed, right?
We have faith in you, Vinny.
Yeah, effectively it's a balanced budget for all practical purposes. Obviously, there's some unknowns in the assumptions, but we'll see what happens and kind of make changes as they come.
Other questions? Okay, you may have. I'm sorry if you said, but what is the amount of the Essex Tech that you have in because you have them lumped together? I don't know that you said.
I have them lumped together, and I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's a couple $100,000, but again, I'm just guessing.
Okay.
And I assume 3% across the board.
For both.
For both.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Looks like Vinny, you're up.
Just a sec.
Yep, got it.
Sure it works. All right, I'm the only one who stood up here. It makes me a little more nervous, but okay. Thank you guys all for coming tonight. Just want to thank the two boards from both towns, the town administrator and town managers, and of course my school committee and superintendent for coming tonight and let me present. So we're here to present the superintendent's initial FY25 budget recommendation. Before I dive into it, I just want to mention one disclaimer for those of you who were here last year in prior meetings. I did set this presentation up a little bit different. I decided to use terms that you hear more in the town, inside the levy limit and outside the levy limit. I'm sure you know the reason for that is the addition of the athletic complex upgrade. It's really throwing a lot of our percentages in the higher categories. So right off the bat, I tried to break out both inside and outside to help everyone in the community understand the difference. So just to dive into it, some of the things we look at when we go to build our budget, the very first thing is our enrollment shift. For those of you who don't know, our regional agreement between the towns and the schools state to break up the expenses between each town, we take a snapshot of the student population per Hamilton, per Wenham, as of October 1 of the 3 preceding fiscal years. Use that as a weighted average to determine the split for the next budget cycle. So we really want to look at that before we start anything so we can realize if there's any major shifts going towards one town or the other. We really want this in the back of our mind before we dive into our expenses, so we can really use that as a kind of a determining factor before we build out our budget. The same kind of holds true for our revenue projections. We want to look at those first and determine if we have any increases or major decreases, so we have that kind of in the forefront of our mind before we build out our expenses. Moving on to the expenses, most people, when they probably go to build their budget, that's the first thing they look at. But again, we try to have kind of the community in mind and the taxpayers, so we kind of do that last when we go to build the budget. But when we do go to look at the expenses, just like your budgets, we look at our collective bargaining agreements. That's where we find our COLA adjustments, our step increases, and any of our column or lane changes. Just like Hamilton, one of the issues we're facing for FY25 is only one of our 5 contracts are currently settled. So we have a lot of assumptions built into our budget at this time as well. The next 2 items we look at while building the budget is our retirements and our staff turnover. Usually when we have a retirement or a turnover, It's more of a kind of veteran, seasoned employee that falls deeper in the pay scale. And we have a tendency, when we replace them, to hire someone who's less seasoned and falls kind of lower in the pay scale. And we recognize savings each time we do this. That's both for retirements and staff turnover. In terms of transportation costs, as many probably know, over the past 2 years, our transportation costs have increased steadily. A lot of this has to do with rising fuel prices and inflation, as well as rising salary costs due to a shortage of bus drivers. Our bus company has had to raise the salaries they pay their bus drivers, and in return, that expense really gets passed on to their customers, which we are one of them. The next item is our out-of-district tuition costs. Out-of-district tuitions covers roughly about 10% of our overall gross budget, so any sway in out-of-district tuitions can have a large effect on our overall budget, so we look to that deeply every year. In addition, we do have old aging buildings. I believe our youngest building is only about is 35 years old now at the middle school, with the rest of them being up to 60 or 70 years old. So we're constantly looking at what needs to be replaced and what needs to be updated. In addition, as you heard Wenham say, we have also been informed to expect higher increases in health insurance premiums this year. Health insurance alone also accounts for about 8% of our overall budget. So again, any sways in premiums there can have a big effect on our budget. And the last thing is any kind of new requests for additional instructional staff that we receive from the principal or leadership team, or any additional investments that they might want to provide students with services. So just to kind of walk through some of the things we looked at this year, I'm going to move to our enrollment shift. The first thing we look at when we go to build our budget on the screen right now is Hamilton's enrollment year over year. As I mentioned, it's a snapshot as the population on October 1. So from October 1, 2022 to October 1, 2023, we saw an increase of 5 students residing in Hamilton that attended our schools. We saw a pretty good fluctuation at the 6th grade and 9th grade level with over 20 students, with over a 20 student increase. But that was offset by some big reductions in our kindergarten level and in 10th grade. But overall for Hamilton, it was an increase of 5 students. Moving on to Wenham, they had a bigger increase at 12 students. Their decreases were more seen at the secondary level, while their increases were seen at the elementary level. One could assume that if this were to continue, as these younger kids move through the grades, you might see a bigger portion of the assessment move towards Wenham. But that does change every year, and it is unpredictable. That's just kind of something I take away when I look at what's happening with the enrollment shift currently happening in Wenham. So here I've combined both enrollments for Hamilton and Wenham. Overall, we did have a increase of 17 students, which based on our residential enrollment only represents an increase of just over 1% of our student population. That isn't all the kids we house, though. We also have tuition-in students and school choice-in students. One thing that happened this fiscal year is our pre-K population increased, and we had to open a 3rd pre-K classroom. Obviously, with that comes additional students, which is why you see an increase at the pre-K level. But something I will talk a little bit about later is our reduction in school choice, where we're seeing a drop in 10 students year over year for students that are joining us from other municipalities. So what does that all mean, and what's the consequences of our enrollment shift? So when you add in the new enrollment on October 1, 2023, and you remove the enrollment from October 1, 2020, it gives you a new percent split between the two communities. Our current split for FY24 is 66.22% Hamilton and 33.78% Wenham. With this new split, 0.7% slid away from Wenham and towards Hamilton, resulting in a new split of 66.29 for Hamilton and 33.71% for Wenham. But what does that mean is what I tried to depict at the bottom of this slide. If you were to take our 24 operating budget as it stands right now at $34 million and just roll it forward 1 year without changing anything, not adding any expenses, any revenues, maintaining that same $34.2 million assessment, it would result in a shift of $24,000 going towards Hamilton and away from Wenham. So before we even do anything, we have an increase to Hamilton of 0.1% and a decrease to Wenham of negative 0.2. This is actually good. Last year, if you look at our enrollment shift, over $240,000 shift away from Wenham and towards Hamilton. So this is more in line with what we like to see. It's a very small, minute shift and really reduces those kind of hills and valleys that you see throughout the budget cycle year to year. Moving on to our revenues, we do have two different types of revenues at the school district. We have our offsets and our general fund revenues. For here, I just put them all on one slide to help summarize and depict what's going on. If you look at this slide, when I look at our revenues, what I really like to see is that total value at the bottom, that percent increase, at least matches what our gross increase is year to year. If it's less, the only thing that means is additional assessments to the taxpayers. So at the very least, we want to see our revenues growing at the same pace as our budget. Obviously, we would like to see it outpace our budget expenses, but at the very least, match it. So when you look at this, that doesn't look like what's happening. But if you look at the very bottom two, our excess and deficiency is really what's driving this number here. Year over year, our excess and deficiency went down $919,000, but our E&D is a one-time revenue source, and the same reduction you see here, you'll see later on as a reduction to our expenses. So because this was a one-time revenue source, we matched the majority of it with one-time expenses. So with a reduction in our E&D revenue, there's also a reduction in our E&D kind of expense offsets. So this really doesn't depict what's happening with our revenue. So all I did was remove our E&D to show you what's really happening with our revenue once you exclude that one-time E&D source. And it's a much better picture that we're seeing with a growth rate in our revenues of 6.12%. This is outpacing our general fund expense budget and is definitely a good thing. I'm going to highlight some of them, not all of them, but just a few of the big ones. School choice, as I mentioned before, we lost 10 students year over year. For every student we take in, we receive approximately $5,000 per student. With drop in enrollment, we're going to see a drop in revenue, so we're carrying that forward into FY24. I'm sorry, FY25. As I mentioned, we had to open a third pre-K classroom. With that third pre-K classroom comes with additional revenue because majority of the students pay to be in our preschool program, so our revenues are increasing year over year. In addition, we have two other major increases in our revenues. That's with our circuit breaker offsets and with our Chapter 70 base aid. The state generously kicked up the percentage that they match towards our circuit breaker, which caused their increase there, and our Chapter 70 aid increased the past 2 years with the Student Opportunity Act because we always budget 1 or 2 years behind on our Chapter 70. So overall, we're seeing a lot of good growth in our revenue at approximately $405,000 over the prior year. So moving on to the expense side of it now, here I have our gross operating budget as the school committee votes on it and as the Department of Secondary Education requires us to break it out in what they call DESI form. Year over year, we are requesting a gross budget increase of $727,000, or roughly 1.65%. To be completely honest, this looks good as well, but if you look into the detail, the E&D is what's driving this lower percent increase year over year. Just to highlight it, it's the kind of the second line from the top. Remember, this is in DESI form, which doesn't match what you're going to see on the next slides, but nonetheless, this is what's driving the reduction, the smaller increase year over year of roughly 1.65% that I will get into in a moment. So here's where I kind of introduce inside the levy limit and outside the levy limit. So our operating budget that I just showed you is inside the levy limit. In addition to that, we have debt service projects. From both communities, out of the 6 debt service projects we currently have on the books, Hamilton's portion of the Cutler feasibility study is the only debt service project that was not voted as a debt exclusion. So their portion only of the one project is included inside the levy limit. That is why it's the only number represented on this chart. So when you add everything together, you come up with a final assessment inside the levy limit. To start, you start with our 24 operating budget. You can see I layered in the shift from our enrollment of the $23,000. We then layered in the changes in our offsets and revenues, and then last, any changes to our expenses inside the levy limit. That resulted in a overall initial assessment request of $35.5 million, or roughly 3.72% year over year. This next chart is the same chart you just saw, except I break out the operating budget and the debt service, so you can see both sides of the house where the expenses are coming from. Again, the only debt service you see on here is the $33,000, because that's the only portion of the debt service inside the levy. So then we move on to all the debt outside the levy limit, which is, this slide is the main reason I started talking about the levy limit and mentioning in our budget. You can see the final line on here, the athletic complex upgrades. For FY25, it'll be the first initial payment to pay down the band that we will roll into in FY25. Ultimately, we're predicting to borrow a little bit more than $10 million for the project after receiving all other revenue sources and private donations. That roughly $10 million is going to be broken down into 10 payments over the next 10 years. For the first year, it results in about a little bit more than $1 million principal payment and about a $500,000 interest payment, resulting in an additional $1.5 million being added into our debt service. As you can see, this means an increase in debt service year over year of 258%, which is the exact reason I tried to talk about levy limit and outside the levy limit. So you can see that this is a different number that's calculated outside of the levy limit and is mainly driven because of the athletic complex upgrades. Yes?
What's the total?
I love that you ask questions so I can take a breath.
What's the total principal and interest of the athletic field? It's 10 million plus how much interest are you projecting over the 10-year life?
We haven't got the final rates yet, but probably about $3 million.
So it's $3 million of financing costs.
Correct, over 10 years.
Over the $10 million.
Yeah. We'll know more in about 3 weeks from now when we go out for the issuance, but yes, that is what I'm estimating at the time.
So it's at $18 million total spend. Gross.
All in, including
Everything.
all private donations and,
Yeah, CPC money.
correct. Yep, estimated. Okay. So that results in a final assessment when you combine both items outside the levy limit and inside the levy limit of approximately $37.6 million, which is an increase of $2.8 million year over year, and as a net assessment results in an 8.07% increase, which breaks down into an 8.9% increase for Hamilton, excuse me, and a 7.85% increase for Wenham. So I do have a little note at the end of the presentation, but right here I tried to summarize the major changes within our operating budget, but at the end of the presentation I do point you to a presentation I made to the school committee, I believe 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I detailed out every single penny that changed year over year. Our total budget is around $44 million, our gross budget, and I literally detailed out a $59 item. So if anyone really wants to look at all the specific changes, please go look at that presentation, and you can find all that detail. In addition to that, during that presentation, there's an exhibit for the line item detail, where we break out all roughly 500 of our accounts. If anyone wants more detail, but to not bore everyone and run through that hour-and-a-half presentation again, I kind of just made a summary slide for everyone, and I'm just going to highlight only a couple of the big ones. Obviously, just like you guys, our biggest cost drivers is our staff. Between our COLAs, our health insurance, and our step increases, it's well over almost $1 million in increases alone, just to turn the page from one fiscal year to the next. That is being offset by items that planned reductions for this year to help reduce the assessment for next year, as well as turnover from staff and kind of reductions across the board, as well as that $919,000 item that you see again, which is the reduction in our E&D offsets. The next slide is just a summary of our staffing changes. I broke them out by school because everyone usually likes to see kind of what happened in their school their kids at. So I detailed out the staff changes by school location. That we did a lot of switching this year, meaning we changed one program's location from Winthrop to Cutler, or changed one from Bucher to Winthrop. But the net result overall was only a 1.06 FTE increase. And you can really attribute this to the additional pre-K classroom that we had to open because enrollment went up. So yes, there's a lot of movements, a lot of ins and outs, but the end result is really only an increase of one staff member, and again, it relates to that additional classroom that we had to open. The last item, the second to last item that I'm going to go over, just for clarity reasons, is our E&D. I understand it's making our numbers a little wonky, making some items go up and some items go down. So I just tried to give you a little bit more detail on what happened. Year over year, we are seeing a reduction of $919,000 in E&D offsets. Again, this amount is spread out over multiple DESI categories, so if you try to go back and look, you have to add in a few different line items to get to it, which is another reason I tried to put it all on one slide for us tonight. When you have E&D offsets, these are planned one-time items. So when you add them into 24 and you build your 25, you take out everything from 24. So in 24, we asked for $1.7 million transfer for capital stabilization, $300,000 to upgrade the high school theater lighting system, $275,000 as part of a district-wide smartboard replacement project, $126,000 for upgrades to the room next door to us, the Bucher Gymnasium. In addition, $773,000 of excess and deficiency was returned to the towns in the form of a reduced FY24 assessment. So all those items come out when you go to build the 25 budget, and then we add in any new E&D offsets. In FY25, it adds up to $2.2 million. At this moment, we're requesting $470,000 be added to our OPEB trust to help lower our overall OPEB liability. The same matching amount into the capital stabilization fund. An additional $315,000 to end the 4-year smart board replacement project across the district. If this ultimately gets approved, it will mean that every single classroom across the district does have a new smart board technology in it. In addition, we have $225,000 to replace aging equipment across the district. And I believe for the 3rd or 4th year in a row, ever since the COVID budget, we are dedicating $773,000 again of excess and deficiency to help reduce the FY25 assessment to the towns. Yes.
Just a reminder, excess and deficiency emanates from underspending the current year budget.
As well as receiving additional revenues over what you budgeted.
Right.
The combination of the two. Yep.
So year over year, now your signs on here are one's negative and one's positive, right? It's all sort of the same.
Correct, yes.
So the idea is the most recent year, so that means the difference between budgeted and actual is tighter.
Correct. We are trying to close it, and it's going in that direction, but not fully there yet.
The trend, and I think the desire is to kind of bring that down so that we're not budgeting a high number and then generating the excess. So it's just dumbing it down for myself and for everyone else.
Yep, correct. On about a $40 million budget, I would strive to have about 2% left over at the end of the year. To be truthfully honest, you don't really want live that tight, especially in a school district when you're trying to serve students and things happen on a daily basis. You want a little bit of wiggle room. In my point of view, that's roughly about 2%. So that is what I would kind of strive to end the year with. In FY23, we had, as well as FY22, we had a large amount of unfilled positions. During all of fiscal 23, there was over 20 positions that were vacant the entire fiscal year. At the end of the year, I believe it was just under 1.5 million in payroll alone that we ended with. That might sound like a good thing, or you ended with a lot of money, but in all reality, that's services to kids that weren't being provided. Some of that money was a speech language pathologist to help students that we didn't have in the house, so those students weren't receiving as well as the services as they should have. So, you know, yes, it's great you had money left over, but the only people that are suffering are the students after that.
You could argue that how much impact those services really needed or not. But it's a financial conversation, not
Yep, correct. Yep.
And the last question I would have is, can you remind everybody the outstanding obligation you have behind OPEB? So like 2 years in a row now, you've made a pretty substantial donation into the trust fund. What's the overall school district's obligation?
I believe right now it's about 36 million, I think, somewhere in that ballpark. This will be.
It was higher than that. I know it's in your financial statement.
Correct. It was reduced drastically because last year we put in about $2 million, so it really lowered it. We got a better discount rate. It used to be 40-something. I think it's dropped drastically. We got a new.
So it's really sort of paid off, making this investment. It's going to continue to be there.
Correct. Yep. It did skip a year. It wasn't 2 years in a row, but neither here nor there. It was fiscal 22, that investment of $2 million. I'm sorry, fiscal 23. Fiscal 24 does not have it. We're asking for it in 25. Too many fiscal years going on. Yeah, of course. That kind of wrapped it up. I was just going to go over kind of the timeline coming forward. For the next month, we'll be making presentations to the school committee. As the school committee, as well as the leadership team, will work to refine our budget requests and kind of dive through the numbers more and hopefully push it in a different direction, but time will tell. On January 4th, the school committee is up to vote on a tentative budget. On January 10th, we'll have our third Quintuple board chairs only meeting. And then a week later, we hold our first public hearing And then in the end of January, I believe we all come back to meet for the second quintuple board meeting, right before the school committee votes on the final budget on February 8th. And just to point it out again, if you want more detail, you can head to our website where you can view the presentations from a couple weeks ago. Thank you, guys, if you don't have any other questions.
Thank you. There are other questions?
Yeah, I jotted down a few, but I guess would ask first if my colleagues on the Wenham FinCom had any questions they'd like to ask first?
Go ahead.
No? Okay. So just curious, thank you, Vinnie, for the presentation. But just curious, what is the term of the labor contracts?
I'm sorry, say that one
The
again?
term of the labor contracts that are to
Usually
be...
3 years.
Usually 3 years?
Yep. So the ones coming up will go from 25 to 27.
And do you have a sense of what, if anything, are the effects year over year of any state mandated services or changes in services?
That is a loaded question, as there is a lot of special ed mandated costs, and it would take me a while to break that down, so
Okay.
I do not, to be truthfully honest.
Yeah, how about what is...
Can I jump in on that?
Of course you can.
Actually, if you go back to the budget documents that Vinnie mentioned earlier, our special ed costs projection for next year is actually substantially down from this current year to next year. We've seen a decrease in the number of kids in out-of-district placements, and that's generally the driver. That's a fairly substantial driver of special ed costs. So that's really where you get your movement, the out-of-district costs, and the transportation costs related to those kids. Because not only do we send them to places in other communities, we also drive them and pick them up generally. So those costs are substantial, and that's what drives a lot of the fluctuation in the required part of kids services. And then it depends on your kids you have in place at any particular time in the year. You know, I used an example last year as when we did this. Just yesterday, I had a meeting with a group of superintendents in the area, and one superintendent said, I just got a new move-in that cost me $480,000 of an out-of-district placement that they had no control over, but once that child moves into your community, you inherit that contract. So it fluctuates all over the place, but there is, in this budget, a substantial reduction from 24 to 25 in our special ed costs.
Appreciate that color.
Yeah, of course.
And this is sort of an adjacent topic that we don't need to get fully into, but there's special ed and then there's like IEP and 504, which is sort of a gray area between the two. And I do wonder, like, I'm hearing rumblings that like the teachers are overwhelmed, especially coming out of COVID, with like that gray area, that we're not staffed appropriately for all of the 504s and all of the IEPs and all of the sort of special services that aren't special ed. But I don't see increased head count. Do you feel like we're fine there? Is that?
I do. I mean, traditionally in the past 3 years, the problem positions that we haven't been able to hire are positions related to those particular students. So, for example, I have 5 positions open right now. Out of those 5 positions, they're all special ed. Some of them are teacher's assistants for our higher risk programs. One of them is a speech and language person. Another one's a special ed moderate teacher. So those are teachers that would be in place. So until we get somebody in place, those tend to be where the areas are where there are issues.
There's no representative because they've been open but not filled.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Right. And you're also seeing COVID really drove some serious impacts with kids. You're seeing much more substantial disabilities, dysregulation, especially in the younger populations, where our preschool program has seen a fairly substantial increase in the number of students. We have a program that is a peer-based program, so each classroom has 7 students on IEPs, 8 students who are not, that are peer mentors, and we can fill those 7 students really quickly, and not necessarily the peer side. So you're seeing an increase there. You're seeing an increase in mental health issues. Dysregulation in the lower grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, has dramatically increased, and I think that's what you're seeing. The teachers have to respond to that. I mean, I've been in classrooms. I substituted in a classroom Monday, and it was, you know, it was fun, but also, you know, just some of the behaviors that you don't generally expect. We actually have many of our special ed programs at the Winthrop School, and if you look at the staffing there is fairly dramatic. We have almost 30 teachers' assistants in that building, whereas you go to the Bucher or the Winthrop, there's 10. Yeah, so it's pretty dramatic, and you know, it's one of the things that everybody in the area is trying to figure out how to find the balance, and it's not going to go away soon, but yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, I think teachers are starting to see behaviors in their classrooms that they've never seen before, and IEPs are still written so that kids have the least restrictive access to the curriculum, and that's an important piece of the conversation. So that's kind of that hard balance we're trying to find, and we're working with different groups right now just trying to alleviate some of those strains. And it may even come down to looking at different program adjustments so that we can do things a little bit differently, that maybe a way we haven't. Yeah.
Like if we're going to suddenly see a rise in people, so the district get their kids in outplacements, and then we're, like, do you make an early investment now to bring in additional resources to head it off, or do you wait till we're paying more outplacements? So I don't know how you
Yeah,
it's a
it's a
but I look at it and I'm like, I'd rather spend, nobody repeats this, I'd rather spend now and then instead of like double spending later.
Yeah.
Because we're not equipped to deal with what's coming, and I feel like that's all the conversation I hear is that exactly what you're saying, it's almost out of control.
Yeah, every school district, everywhere. I live with a teacher. She brings home some fascinating stories, even from the high school level. So it's you know, it's troubling, and their kids. You're seeing if you read the Globe, like the kids are not in school. They're not in school. They're missing out. When they're missing out, they're behind. And when they're behind, what are you going to do? They're going to act out. And so you're seeing that accelerate more than it has in the past.
Thanks for that.
Yep.
Got a question. First of all, Vinny, thanks for doing a great job, as usual. I know it's a big deal.
It's nerve-wracking presenting in front of you guys.
But anyway, Eric, we've been talking about capital spending for the last 2 or 3 years. So this is the first budget that now has a significant new spend in it. It's the first of 10 years of the athletic field.
Yep.
2 years, 2 or 3 years from now, we'll be potentially looking at the first year of a new school, whether it's a large school or small school. So this capital wave is coming at us. And I believe in January, you're going to look at sort of the whole district and give us a view of what other capital is out there, high school, whatever else.
Yep, one of our district goals this year is to develop redevelop, kind of go back at our long-term capital plan, which Vinny and Tom, our director of maintenance, they're working on that right now. They have till the end of December to put that together. We'll probably present it in the first meeting in January, which I think is January 4th. So it'll give us a good look at where we're at. I mean, we're looking at even, we have a new software where we're able to look at inventories of kind of all of our quote equipment, if you will, so things that are on our roof, things that are in our classrooms, and that even gives us an opportunity to go back and say, what's that end of life? How long can we get out of it? What's it cost to replace? So they're looking at all of those kind of variables now, so we can get a better picture.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm raising it is, you know, the next sort of 5 years of budget, we're going to be sort of loaded with
Yeah.
pretty expensive messages to taxpayers. And we generally, we know it's coming. So if we get to the end of the approval of a new school, you know, in several years, that's going to add yet another significant.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think keeping our eye on the capital and knowing what's out there is going to be really helpful.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think, you know, in the town, we do the same thing. And I know our capital committee is working with Joe now to really get a good look
We definitely have. I mean, the one that came up a lot last year and the year before was the high school roof. You know, that kept coming up. Then the state yanked their support program for that and moved all that money into the building MSBA funding area because costs were skyrocketing. So they need to offset some of those and change some of the variables in the projects that they currently had in the pipeline. That program is back, so we will try and reapply to that. We're also looking at options related to solar for kind of a double hit. The roof would be replaced and the solar installed, so you're now taking over some of your energy costs at the same point. And generally, that solar would be a zero cost to us in trade for energy crediting. So.
And kind of one final point, if I could pivot over to the new school. The school building committee has been meeting on a regular
Yep.
basis, and we're coming up on a milestone in January with the school building project, and then another one, I think, in April.
Correct.
So my understanding is, based on discussions the other day, that the team, consultant team, project managers are pricing out 8 to 10 different options.
13. 13 options, yep.
13 different options that the committee will then digest and then pick, prioritize one or two of those options as a recommendation that will be made back to the state. So right now, there's costing exercise going on.
Correct.
That'll come back to the committee will then go through those, and then by the end of April, I believe, will then identify sort of the lead candidate, whether it's renovating the school, updating the school, combining schools, and picking them. So no decision has been made yet.
Right.
But we're deep in the process of doing that.
Right.
And the reason I'm bringing it up is I urge taxpayers and interested parties to join in the conversation if they're not in it. But it's a really healthy process going on, and a decision, a recommendation to the state will be made in the next 5 months.
Yeah, early May 2024. Yep. And that process, just so people are aware, people on the boards, if somebody asks you, the pricing they're doing now is preliminary pricing. It's really based on just square foot cost. So that is not an exact price. So be careful when you say, oh, it's only going to cost X. It gives us a rough idea, and it really leads us into the module known as schematic design, which they'll get more granular and give us a tighter cost. But these initial cost estimates that come out will be based on square footage. And then, like I said, the 13 options they're looking at, as John said, from renovation all the way up into a renovation, I mean, just bringing the code, actually, and then renovation and addition, building a new, smaller school, combining schools. So 13 different options right now are being evaluated, and we'll get those, we'll see those numbers probably late December, early January. And then we have, while we're on the air, we have 2 public forums that will be coming up in January. January 10th, we're going to do one at night, 6:30, and then January 17th, we're going to do one, I think 9 in the morning. I'll get that word out to everybody too. So there'll be opportunity for people to get involved. I think it's important for people to get involved and also understand the process. There's a fairly extensive process that's been happening for the past year, and will continue into the next few. Yep.
I got a question, Dano from Wenham Finance, just on the numbers for number of students from 22 to 23 went up by 12 total, including the tuition in and school choice. Do you remember what 21 to 22, what the change was from 21 to 22?
No, but I can look it up very quickly. Just give me a second.
And then I'm just wondering if what we were expecting in the change from 22 to 23. Were we expecting or projecting or hoping for a significant increase or flat or decrease, or did we know?
So
I mean, we didn't know, but we were expecting something.
Yeah, so our expectation was that we would see increases in the elementary level, and we are seeing that in some grades. The unexpected was the increase at the 6th and the 9th grade level. that kind of materialized this year. We're seeing approximately 10% growth since 2020 to now in the elementary pre-K to 5 across the board. And I think we'll see that more, and as we get closer to the possibility of a new school, if the towns vote for a new anything, you'll see that bump up again as you'll get new move-ins related to that. So I think we're anticipating that we're going to bounce a little bit now in the positive direction instead of continually losing students.
I mean, it looks, you said 10% annually from 2020? Is that what you meant? Or
from
10%
20
total?
Total, 20, yeah, from 20, this is just preschool population, from 20 to this current year, you're seeing them 9.44%, so about almost 10%.
Okay, because total looks like about 1%, but preschool, I guess.
Yeah, if you hone in on just the elementary school, that's where you're seeing your highest percentage gains. And we see it in our schools. I mean, this school is bursting at the seams. Winthrop is bursting at the seams.
But so the count, I mean, the flip side of that math is just that the middle and high school aren't growing as fast.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So what was the total? Yeah.
Do you want the total residential or total including choice and all?
Well, I was just trying to compare apples to apples to what you showed us.
Residential students, it dropped 18, and overall it was dropped 30.
From 21 to 22.
October 1, 21 to October 22 dropped 18 and 30, depending which one you're asking about.
Okay, thanks. And then the last part of that question is just the whole demographic cliff that people talk about that I'm probably pretty ignorant about, but isn't there I thought I had a 2025 number in mind, or sometime when there's just going to be a drop-off of the number of kids matriculating. It's colleges, but it's also translating to high schools. And does that ring any bells with anybody, the concept of the demographic cliff? People, fewer school-age kids?
Not specific to 25. I haven't seen that around here. I mean, projections that were done years previous to me, that were, quote, 10 years out, which I think overlapped 25, they were generally flat when they started to look at it across the two communities. So we're actually seeing a tiny bit of a gain. And I think some of the communities are starting to get some rebound out of COVID. A lot of our school systems, especially the ones around here, lost a fairly substantial number of kids between 20 and 23. And you're starting to see, like, and that's why I used our elementary school as an example. Elementary school has kind of rebounded back to their pre-2020 number. So you're seeing it there. You're just not seeing it on the top end.
Great. That'll be great if that continues and snakes through the system.
Right.
Eric, one follow-up question. You mentioned that the new school will act as a magnet. So keep in mind that, there might be some students who are off private schools who may return to the district if a new school is built. That's been your observation over the years, that a new school tends to
this is my third school project over my career, and you generally see that. You see a bump in enrollments. Not huge, but you do see where there's opportunity in the community for move-ins. I go back to the Hamilton figure that was presented to me by a real estate agent. It was like 113 houses in 2022 changed hands at an average price of $900,000, but a giant percentage of those were younger families with kids that weren't yet school age, which was fascinating to me. So those kids are coming, plus people who say, there's a new school, we want to go there. So you do see it. It is an effect, and MSBA talks about that a little bit, but the architects had reminded us of that in the beginning. So, and you see that wiggle room built into the MSBA numbers. When you look at the overall numbers and you just combine kids in the different configurations that we have, there's a little play in there because you do get that kind of that increase in effect. So.
Excuse me, Eric, I think you touched on this just a little bit, but as currently staffed, what would you say is the capacity of the district to handle these increases? 12 year over year, but maybe more coming, and what is the tipping point for when
Yeah,
reached
at
capacity.
the elementary
As far
level, you're
as
at capacity.
educators are concerned, you need to start adding.
Elementary level, you're at capacity. You're at classroom capacity, you're at capacity. When you come into our, you know, let's bring a first grade teacher in here, when 23 first graders in your class, it gets tough to manage. We like to see our grade level classes at the 18, 19 range at our elementary schools. They're under capacity at the secondary level, and we'll make some adjustments along the way here. We made some adjustments last year, which brought our number FTEs down by 11 last year, and that was primarily secondary moves. So you'll probably see something else like that this year if you watch our school committee meetings. I'm sure everybody does. The enrollment reports are pretty clear where you're seeing the kind of the limits being met, and then but not so much. So we are making some shifts because of that. And even when you talk about the MSBA, they calculate their numbers on an average of 22 in elementary classrooms. So we're above that in some cases. You know, our second grade continues to grow. We continue for some reason to get second grade move-ins, but you know, all kids are welcome, and our teachers do a great job with the numbers they have in their classrooms. There are some days when, you know, you have 24 kids and you're a lone teacher in your classroom is not so easy when they're, you know, first or second graders or even kindergarten kids.
So Vinny talked about, a drop in school choice revenue. Was that intentional because of that capacity, or was that we didn't see the demand?
You're just not seeing the demand anymore. Yeah, it's funny, I just had this conversation with a group of superintendents. They're all seeing the same thing. There's not as many kids requesting school choice, and we generally have limited ours to 9th grade. That's where our drop-off, our 8th to 9th grade is our biggest drop-off, so that gives us the opportunity to fill some holes. You know, the numbers, when you look at the lottery, so say 40 families apply, those 40 families also apply to Fenwick or St. John's or Pingree's, and they wait to see where they get in, and then they decide. So, you know, you actually, what we do in our system is we go through the lottery, give out the first, say, 12 seats, and give people 2 weeks to decide. If they don't decide, we move on. Last year and the year before, we went through the entire list and still had a couple of spaces. We still have a couple of spaces right now in the 9th grade. So the demand's just not there like it used to. Used to get 100 families. When, you know, 10 years ago, you got 100 people signing up for the lottery.
Vinny, excuse me. I think you said earlier that with school choice those students come with $5,000 in tuition. But that doesn't come close to covering the cost of educating them. So is school choice actually something good for us?
The best analogy I've heard is if you think of a plane, it takes off no matter what, even if it has empty seats. So it's going to cost us the same amount of money to educate this classroom at 18 kids, kind of bring in the empty 2 seats and take the additional revenue, but it's just the best explanation I've ever heard.
Fair analogy.
Yeah. It's also, the number was established in 1993 by state law, hasn't changed. You know, 1993 to now, that number hasn't moved 1 inch. It's fascinating, and every superintendent in the state has always pushed that with their local legislators. It's just like, you know, 5,000 just doesn't do it, but it is what it is. That's what's the actual number in the state law.
Just since we're on the subject of school choice, do we track outgoing public school choice students, and could you maybe just address that, and also how does that impact the budget, if at all?
So outgoing, so we have to track this is going to sound weird, we have to track every school-age child in our district, whether they come to our schools or not. So my secretary spends 3 months emailing every school in this area, every private school, every agency, everywhere a kid could go to school, to try and determine where kids are. So we do track them. Even kids that school choice out, kids that could say, I want to go to Beverly, or I want to go The tech doesn't count as choice out. It's a different program, but other schools that are public schools that kids can choice into if their communities have accepted the school choice program. I forget our number. I think it's 24.
21 last year.
21 last year. Thank you.
Haven't got this year's number.
It was in the 20s. So those kids, if they came into the district, it would depend on where they came in. If they all came into elementary school, that would be difficult. It would really jump our class sizes up. If they came into the secondary, we could probably absorb that.
But, so the 21 students who last year choiced out, so that represents, if my math is right, $105,000 to various school districts, but is that, where does that money come from? I'm looking for a little school choice primer here, but does that come out of state aid to us or some other way?
Are you asking where the money
Yeah,
to send the kids out?
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
in the general fund budget, like the 40 million. There's one line in there, if you look at the detail, for school
Okay.
choice out.
Right, okay,
So it's included in the whole kind of assessment.
thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Vinny.
Of course.
All right. So, I don't know if anybody else has anything you want to. If not, the next item on the agenda is actually really only involves the school committee and the Hamilton Select Board. We're going to have a quick discussion about the interim school committee appointment. So you, because it's a public meeting, you are all, of course, welcome to stay and participate. I mean, I guess you can't participate, but listen. But at this time, unless you have anything else, I would say that the Wenham Select Board and Wenham FinCom and Hamilton FinCom, well, I guess you're not really here anyway. You could go ahead and adjourn your meetings if that's where you are.
Okay. I move that we adjourn the combined, the Wenham Select Board meeting at 7:52.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
And I move to close the Wenham Finance Committee meeting, joint with the school committee and our colleagues from Hamilton at 7:52. Second, please. Seconded by Finn. All in favor? Aye, Jeff.
Hi, Dave. Hi, Dan. Hi, Finn.
We are closed. Thank you.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
This was fantastic to see everybody. Good conversation.
And please, don't hesitate to reach out if you need something.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely the way.
I could.
I don't know.
That's the other
That's a date for a program. I have no idea if there's more than one.
Sure. Why not?
It's gonna mention it's coming.
Well, it's coming.
Yeah.
If you look at recent stats on kids,
I know it's not easy.
yeah, our 7.
This is Jeff.
Yeah, no, I think we'll be quick, but.
Nice job. Yeah, good to meet you. Nice job. Hot beats like, I hate presenting.
You do a great job, don't worry. You really
when
do.
I know the info. When I see me nervous, it's because I don't know what I'm talking about.
The chick you will stay.
All right.
Who needs a lie detector?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so we are all still in session here, all of us. What was that? Excellent. All right, so my hope is that we can just have a quick conversation to prepare for the next week's meeting, which is next Wednesday on the 6th, in which we all together, the select board and the school committee will appoint a new school committee member. And just to sort of, I think everybody's already heard this, but I don't know if the whole select board here, but basically our regional agreement spells it out very clearly what to do when we have a resignation, which is what occurred. And that is that the town select board from the town where the departing member is from, which is Hamilton in this case, joins together with school committee. We get letters of interest. We've already received 2 letters of interest. The deadline is Monday, so there's still time. We may get more. And 2. We've received 2 so far. That person that we will appoint will serve in that interim appointment until the election, and then that person can choose to run for the remainder of the term, which in this case would be 2 additional years. Or, of course, they could choose not to. What I was hoping to do tonight was just to give, what I did, these are not, I did not, I did lightly edit them, but I didn't create these questions. I pulled them from previous interim appointment interviews. I only really deleted one, which was a very COVID-specific question from when we got Julia. So my hope was today just to talk about what we imagine that meeting looking like, and whether people feel comfortable with these questions, whether people want to, have thoughts on these questions. We can go through them one at a time, or if you guys have thoughts, or any of the school committee, we have not discussed this as a committee either, so.
All the vacancy is on question 3.
Yep.
It says,
I didn't realize we'd posted the vacancy.
Run for the remainder of the term. They actually have the option to run for the 2 or the 3.
Correct, I know. I didn't know how confusing to make it. Confusing. But we can, yeah, so we could ask that question in a, yeah.
Yeah, other than David's comment on that, the questions look fine. These are kind of a reiteration of what we did during the last round of interviews.
Yeah.
So, I thought they were good questions last time. I think just adding that 2/3-year term to that question 3 would be good, but other than that, I think they all look good.
I don't know if I'd add another question, because there's a lot of questions here. I'm thinking something about communication, how, I don't want to say advocate, but
So-
maybe how would you,
So,
maybe advocate. How would you advocate on behalf of the school committee?
so, this is why we're having this conversation. It's very interesting because, I think one of the great things about having this meeting in public is that it is certainly possible that our candidates are listening to this, which, in fact, I hope they are, right? That's, right? That's,
Is this an exhibit?
It is not an exhibit.
Okay.
What was that?
It is now.
It will be after. It will be afterwards, but we're editing it right now.
Oh, okay.
Right. So no, not because it will be edited. It can get added afterwards. But what was I going? Oh, I was going to say that it's interesting because I did discuss these questions today with Eric, and Eric had a very similar. He actually highlighted question 5. I'm going to just show my hand here and said something quite similar to what Julia just said about how are you going to be communicating. And my answer was, I said, well, I kind of think that's the answer to number 5 is that, like,
I think number 5 is different than what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So number 5, because this will be on an exhibit, can I read it?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
How
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
would you work with other local government boards and committees? I think is different than how would you be an advocate or a team player. I'm thinking of specifically maybe the budget. But of course we all have dissent, and if we want to we disagree with the budget, we don't want to advocate for it. But how would you communicate the values and the district goals to your community? Something, I don't know. I think we should be advocates, and that's just my personal opinion, but I don't know if I'm bringing that in here. What do you think?
Specifically, like leveraging a personal platform to keep the community involved and informed.
I'm just saying, how would you inform and talk about everything that we're working on to the community?
Yeah. And I think you could almost, we could preface it by saying, like, one of the challenges in local government
Yes.
is the sort of, echo chamber. And a lot of that is leveraging personal and, community platforms to ensure people stay connected. Like, tell us your experience with, communication within your community or within your networks.
Okay,
Love that.
let's write that down.
Let's record it. Recording. I love that.
I think that's
Yeah,
good. I
we're
would
rec-
almost,
we're
to
recording.
Julie's comment with the second part of questions 5, I guess. I think the first part, how would you work with other local government boards and committees? I think that's fine. But the second part, what would you hope to learn from other local officials then? I mean, I would rather hear more of
Me
what
too.
Caroline said instead of that second question in that
Okay.
number 5 there. Because that's kind of,
I think it might
what
be
are they
a
gonna
little,
know right now? They're gonna go, learn from the FinCom what the budget is?
it might be redundant to the first part as
Yeah.
well. Like, how do you work with, how you learn from?
Yeah, so maybe the first part is kind of how you're gonna work with them, and then the second part would be how would you communicate with them and the community, and kind of insert what Caroline said there more eloquently.
Right. We can decide, but we may have Caroline ask that question, because. That's going to be complicated.
I have a question about number 2.
Yep.
Which is, I feel like in years past, one of the problems is people don't know what this committee actually has
Correct.
purview over.
Yep.
And I think that gets a little bit to that, but I almost wonder if we should make it more pointed, which is like, what do you see as the role of a school committee member? Like, is that
I love that.
it? Or,
No, I like that.
I mean,
like, I've been in there and changed the curriculum of the high school on my committee.
Exactly.
What I was going to mention when you guys are asking that is that the role really tends to be sort of, as all of our roles are, right, is taking that individual minutia, going through there, doing the work, and then sort of being able to create sort of sound bites and push it out to the community or the other boards, right? And, so there is definitely a big difference on what people think we do on the other side of the table. And I say that whenever I sort of meet new candidates coming in, and I like to usually try and take them out for coffee and sort of try to explain a lot what's going on. Because I think there is a lot, especially when you're coming in at this time of year, right, to jump in with both feet in the right at the thick of budget season is really a daunting task. This was the brief version of all of our budgets, so it's definitely would be interesting to hear what they're thinking coming in and sort of see where they are, because I think if you have a good enough view to be like, well, coming in and trying to do this, if you could sort of name that, I think you're at a much more of an advantage, as opposed to, like, well, the curriculum needs to change, it needs to change out, and like, oh.
I have one suggestion.
April, you have more time to do work like that. But like I said, bringing someone in right now, you're sort of looking for someone who understands it.
Can't hear him very well.
There's a lot of little things going on, which we sort of filter out
Needs to talk
back
into
into
the
the
mic.
community. So I would be interested in changing that to sort of reflect that.
All right, do you have a suggestion on exactly how to change that?
Let's wordsmith it right now.
I think number 2 would give insight, though, into what they think the role is.
Yeah, but I think maybe just add it, just like, what do you see as the role and responsibility of the school committee and your placement, and what areas of interest do you have in that committee? Like, just make it a little more. Reminds me of when Mark Johnson told me about it, right? He's like, if you don't care how DPW trucks are financed,
Yes.
you actually don't want to be on this
Right.
And I was like, oh, it was a little late now.
And we've had a lot of debate on the committee about the role of, I know one particular member that I right? So it's no longer on the committee. But about what is the role in the community, and I would think it would be very interesting to see.
So I'm trying to wordsmith, unless somebody else has it wordsmithed already.
Well, I think it's just sort of, the first part is what do you think the school committee's role is? And then two, what is the original question? What are your areas of interest on the committee? And what strengths will you bring to the committee? It's like a three-part question.
Okay.
It's a big interview.
Yeah.
So what is the role and responsibilities of the school committee, and where, like, which of those roles and responsibilities interests you, right? And that kind of weave it in.
Well, another version of that would be what in your professional or non-profit experience is relevant to this role. I mean, define the role, but
Like what strengths do you bring?
Right, that gets back to the what, right, that gets back to the what strengths do you bring?
David, the only reason I would hesitate to ask about like professional experience is because I know that there are people that are afraid to run because they don't have professional experience. That's the only reason I would hesitate to say, like, what is your professional experience? I'd rather say strengths, because I know there are a lot of,
Sure.
I mean, I happen to have the nonprofit experience and the public administration experience, but I know a lot of people get hung up on that. When I encourage them to run, they say, oh, I don't have any experience, or I've never worked in this. But they have other strengths they bring to the table. That's my only hesitation to ask that. What do you think, Dana?
I don't know, I'm torn about that.
I think you can say it's not required. Maybe we just have a caveat, it's not required, but if you want to share.
Yeah, I think it's the same question. I think, I'm not opposed to using the word professional, but,
Say strengths, but you're asking the same question.
right, but people are gonna bring their professional experience or their,
Say my strength, well, I work in X, I do this.
I agree.
Or they might not work.
Right, either way.
okay, so I'm just trying to wordsmith. So I have, what is the, I mean, is the question just what is the role of the school committee? And what are your areas of interest? Or what are your, I just want, who has it written down?
Yeah, so do you see as the role and responsibilities of the school committee, and where do your interests lie within those roles and responsibilities? And what strengths do you bring?
I know.
That's a great question.
I need a minute, yeah.
Okay,
I mean, it's three questions, I think.
it's kind of three questions, but I do think it can get asked all at once. All right. David, because I know did you feel like that was
yeah,
addressed?
Yes, thank you. Are you able to say who the two expressions of interest from, in this instance?
Yeah, I mean, only just making clear that we know that there could be more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so far we have two letters of interest. One is Natalie Hildreth, and the other one is Trent Honda. And I think, I don't know, I'm
missed
hoping
that.
Janelle will send those out to all of us as so she'll send them out tomorrow, and then we'll send them out.
Everybody
So
will get the full package.
you'll get the full package, and then, but we may have,
There may be more.
there may be more, but there's no reason.
Who is the second one again?
Well, I'll tell you, my reasoning was that she sent them to me.
Don't know that.
And so I thought to myself, well, why should I have this information and no one else does? That was,
Yeah,
You can do whatever you want.
so, I mean,
I think that makes sense. And if
Right.
we get more, she can forward them.
yeah, so, and we don't know whether we'll get more or not until Monday. Okay, so I just want to quickly go through the questions to make sure that we have, it looks like number one, people are good with, is that correct? Number two, I'm still going to make sure, go back and listen to this, but basically we're going to say something along the lines as, what do you see as the roles and responsibility of the school committee? What are the areas, and what areas are of particular interest to you, and what do you see as your strengths? Something along, I will listen to the recording to get it straight. Number three, I have an edit to just explain in the question that it's either they could actually run for either the 2-year or the 3-year term. Number 4, I didn't hear anything about. Number 5, I have, how would you work with other local government boards and committees? And then Caroline is going to wordsmith the second half of that question. And then I didn't hear anything about number 6, was really just about time commitment is real.
Just so you know.
All right, good.
Yeah. So when we posted, won't we post a comprehensive job description as well? As well as asking them, are we going to define what we understand the role, at least the formal elements of the role will be?
Are you saying you want in the question for us to define the role?
Not in
or-
the question, but when we post it and ask for interest, like you would with any.
I don't think we have a comprehensive description.
Should
no.
we put one together?
I think question 6 actually does a pretty decent job of, giving a very, very quick
And you're
elevator
recruiting
speech of,
somebody.
of the
I
role.
would thought.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I
actually-
mean, as you know, after being here, for the better part
Might
of a
scare
year,
people off.
Right.
It,
Put it
it's
together
so
there.
much different than,
Right.
than you think it is until to get into it. And
Right. I will say, though, to your point, David, I mean, the pat answer is, that we basically have 3 roles, which is to hire and evaluate the superintendent, set policy, and approve the budget.
And goals. Yeah.
And that's, but in reality, like, you notice that,
And negotiate.
negotiating all those contracts isn't
Yeah,
one of
exactly.
those, I guess that falls under budget, but that's a pretty separate, it's a pretty large topic of things that we do.
It is, yeah.
So,
I think it's worth spelling it out. Some people may think that's exciting, some may
pardon me?
think run away
They
from
spell
it.
it out in the law. Like if you look at chapter 71.
We can do that at the end to ask each. So my thought was, again, and
Section described.
my
Just use that.
thought was that we would ask them to, and they did before, and I'm particularly glad Julia is here because Julia actually was on the other side. That's how Julia originally came to the school committee. And I did rewatch that meeting. So we did at that time give opportunity for a quick, they were very brief opening statement of the candidates.
That was on Zoom, though.
It was all on Zoom. I was quarantined. It was a strange time. Yes, it was a very strange time. But I think that, and then I think, yeah, it sounds like that would be a polite thing, certainly at the end, to ask if they have any questions.
Are we asking them for an opening statement? We should let them know.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
let
we
them
will.
know.
Yep, we will.
Yep.
I don't think it's a question that we need to ask for, maybe.
Yep.
But given the reasons that the seat's been vacated, do we need to say anything? Like, there are a couple of things on their minds that you feel like you can
I don't,
responsibly engage in these things, or is it, that was a one-off thing and the person had a conflict that they couldn't overcome?
we don't actually have a reason that the seat is vacated. The person resigned. Yeah, that's all. So. Hmm? Okay. Good. Okay. So I'm glad you said that. So the meeting begins at 7, and typically we would want to do this right at the top of the meeting to allow you all to come and the candidates to come. We do, it happens to be that the meeting is the same meeting in which we are honoring some student athletes, and we usually try to put them right at the top for the very same reasons. So I guess we would ask you if you're willing to, what do we think? How long do you think it
It's
will
about
take?
15 minutes.
About
or so.
15 minutes to honor some student athletes. Could be kind of fun. It is on a
Correct.
Wednesday
Next Wednesday.
because the first Thursday, I believe, is the first night of Hanukkah. So we are on a Wednesday, which is unusual. But so that would be what I would anticipate is that start at 7 o'clock, have some recognition, and then we would do this. Then we would do this interview, and then You could all stay, or you can. So I have to speak with Corinne, but they have to get sworn in.
Once we vote, I mean, they're in, but they have to be sworn.
Right, they would not, yes, we vote right then and there, and then they would not, they get sworn in after, so they don't participate in the rest of they're not voting for the rest of the meeting because they have to get sworn in.
Because you're talking, you're debating in front of them.
Yep.
Is it a popularity vote, or is it you vote one down and then you vote the other one in? Like, how does
So, right now,
like, is it like?
No. So, no, this is actually a really important question. Right now, we only have 2 candidates, in which case, it's super easy, right? Everyone's gonna. Okay, so if we only had 2 candidates, it's one person, one vote, we go around, everybody votes.
You say the name?
Yeah. Okay,
Oh, so
however.
Are we voting down some, are we saying yay or nay? We're not saying yay or nay.
What if we don't want to vote for either of them? Is that allowed?
I'm just telling you how it was done before. We don't have to do anything in particular. If these are.
The ballot.
No. I just watched the meeting. I can tell you exactly how they did, how we did.
Said a name.
Yeah, you
Said a
can't,
name.
but
Okay.
I'm almost positive you can't do it in like secret ballot form. It has to.
No, we did it out, I know, because I actually cast the final and deciding vote. And it was,
When we've been involved, it's basically a public debate in front of
Correct.
candidates. It's off.
I think it does.
Very awkward.
yeah. But there's yes, no, all of that, it has to be out, it's in public, it's not a secret ballot. But then to Caroline's question, if there were to be, so with 2 candidates, it would be very simple, just go around and say, to your point, last time we did this, which was with the Wenham Board of Select Board, we had 4 candidates. And they actually did something like you're saying, everybody gave their top 2, we narrowed it down, and then, so, like, I guess we'll sort of cross that bridge when we come to it, I guess. Well, it's all of us deciding how we want to do it, so.
But you'll guide the vote. I mean, like, you'll talk about whether we're doing a yay or nay.
Yeah, well, but, I mean, but it.
Where's my taser?
Yeah, but it does matter. I mean, to me, if there's only 2 candidates, it's quite simple.
Unless there's an even number of people in the table.
Right, unless,
Oh, and, okay.
yes, if there's an even number. Right, I guess someone asked what if you don't want to vote for either candidate, I guess you could vote.
Abstain?
You could abstain,
abstain, okay.
right, you could abstain.
Not that I'm planning on doing that. I'm
Right,
just
no.
Curious.
No, it's good to have all these hypotheticals. All right, so I guess it's a lot of hypotheticals, but if there are more than 2 candidates, do people feel like they want to get involved in sort of that? Or do we, I just don't know.
Involved in what, sorry? In like.
Sort of
voting
trying to
yay or
narrow the
nay?
field and then we could see if there's a tie or whatever,
I
yeah.
would say if there's 2 or 3 or 4, everyone gives their top
Right.
vote, and you tally that,
Right,
and then you decide there was
right.
3.
We don't get, I mean, we could get involved in
Don't want
ranked
to go for
choice.
the preferential system? Quick
What's
runoff.
that?
Don't want to go for the quick runoff system.
Well, no, I mean, that is sort of that's sort of how we did it last time, a little bit. It was, so, anyway.
The time before, I think this is like my 4th time
Yeah.
doing it, but it's a couple of the times we did with larger groups, and we did. narrow it
Cambridge
down.
has you number every candidate. What, 1, 2, 3, 4 if this one.
Pull out the first.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah, it's a good system.
Can I just ask?
yeah.
It's how it always translates.
Administrative, once the committees
Board.
decide and make the final vote, if you could have Eric or Vinnie
100 last
notify
100 years.
town clerk. Our town clerk has a very well-established process by, once she's notified, she sends a letter to the candidate, so that informs them to come in and get sworn and everything. So it'd make it easier for Corinne if you guys could just notify her the next day, and she will take it.
We can just email that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I had already, it's on my list of to-dos that I want to let her know ahead of time that this is coming, so I'll let her know. Thank you. Yep.
So open statement, then somebody will ask the questions, and then maybe we get discussion amongst the board, and then.
And then we'll vote. Yeah.
Right, 'cause
think you got number 5. No, I don't have an opinion that we could,
No, we actually.
whatever, yeah, I don't know that it matters too much. But yeah, I mean, just people have,
She's a good sense of
I
humor.
don't, the school committee loves when I
Sharp as a
highlight
tack.
things and ask who wants to read. Okay, all right. Do we feel like we've got everything? I'm very grateful and appreciative to the whole select board for staying after and coming next week.
And you guys are fine with honoring the student athletes first, right? Because I already said yes.
Excellent, yes, well, they,
You did, I'll make a motion to adjourn the select board for tonight at 8:20. All those in favor say aye. Ayes have it, thank you all.
I move,
I move to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the school committee meeting at 8:20.
I- seconded by David Frankel, all those in favor? Aye. And we are adjourned.
Right over you.